Yes, please.
Okay, I'm not clear on if we lose body shape when we make our transition, how are these images coming back as bodies?
Well, we don't know that the images are actually images of the spirit. They are apparently created by the spirit, perhaps based on their own memories of what they looked like in their life. We're told that our so-called astral bodies, our light matter bodies that we take on after we die, are basically a continuity of our earthly self-image. And that's the way in which we present ourselves to others and set our own boundaries in that realm. These things are not physical as we think of them, and space and time are not the same there as we think of them. But it's the best we can do here to kind of create these metaphors, create concepts that are sort of serviceable. But in our current consciousness, we don't have the language or concepts to really get what's going on. But some of these are just my best guesses based on the research I've done and some experiences I've had and so forth. So I hope I've answered your question. Yes?
Assuming that the consciousness is what creates this phenomenon, and I accept that, assuming that consciousness or astral bodies or whatever create these phenomena that we've just seen. Now, I have consciousness, you have consciousness. Do you have any thoughts on why we can or can't do similar phenomena because of our own consciousness?
That's an excellent question, and I'm not sure we can't. Psychokinesis is a fact that's been proven in laboratories. A lot of it, I think, depends on our beliefs about what we are and what we could do. People who try to do experiments in psychokinesis often succeed in moving small objects, so on. So I think a lot of what we think of as our limitations really have to do with our self-concept. Yes, we all have consciousness, but wait a minute. Perhaps we all are consciousness, and we have bodies of various kinds. And when you turn it around that way, a lot of these phenomena seem to start to make sense. And the variety of them seems to make sense, just as we see variety in our own lives, in our own interests and focus and talents and leanings and so on. In a sense, each of us lives in our own universe. And that's kind of a sobering realization. I think it's a miracle we can communicate at all sometimes. Thinking of a time, some years ago, I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I was up in the hills with a friend one day. And we spent about two hours up on a hill just looking over the beautiful Bay Area and talking and so on. And during those 2 hours, this big blimp was flying across the whole area, up and down and up and down. And if we got down off the hill and we're chatting, and I made reference to that blimp. She said, "What blimp?" So, for her, there was no blimp. So it kind of makes you wonder what we see or don't see, but also what we notice and don't notice, and how we create the reality that we take the world to be based on our particular noticing. When you really start meditating on that, it gets very interesting. How do we create and project what we take to be reality? A wise teacher of mine once said, "There is not that which we call reality. Reality is more of an emotional requirement than anything else." I think that's pretty wise. So, because each of us means a different thing by it. Yes, please.
Could I ask you to compare the electronic communication process with channeling through a psychic medium? For the last 7 years, I've been doing that, and the conversations go on typically for an hour or 2 hours. These electronic communications are very convincing about the afterlife. I think they're wonderful, but it looks like a little bit of a struggle is going on to get a coherent, complete sentence through the electronic network. How do you see that, the struggle that goes on? Thank you.
Well, if you think of the afterlife very crudely as a sort of a multi-story building, and we're in the basement or on the first floor, to be able to project that intelligence and consciousness and concepts and words into our lifeless electronic equipment, the source has to be pretty close to us, like the second story. A good medium can reach up through several stories and meet the folks halfway, as it were, and be a more sort of fluid channel, and a channel that's more able to understand the subtleties of communication. So what's going on here with technology is kind of a crude thing. It's limited. We don't understand, what makes it harder or easier beyond a few very general things. And to me, it's a proof of concept, basically, more than anything else. If you want to have a real conversation, either become a medium yourself or find a good medium and work with them over time to refine the communication. I think it was another part of your question. That was it. Okay, thank you. Yes?
Thank you. I do have a big mouth, but this may be something that you've heard of before. I've shared this story with a few people over the last couple of years, but I haven't had anybody say that they've had anything similar. And that is elderly mother-in-law, passed away, non-technology person. Significant date happens years after she's gone, i.e. sending her eldest off to college for the first time. I'm in the driveway saying goodbye as my husband's driving him away. I come in, find our answering machine light on, no message. I go back and hit missed calls, and my mother-in-law's name is on the recorder, or, Margaret Decker. And she hasn't had a phone connected in years. It happened twice.
Yeah. Yes. I had a similar situation with my late partner Jane, who died in 2007, was a complete technophobe, God bless her. And one night, sometime after she died, I was thinking about her and went into the bedroom where we had a piano where I played music for her when she was sick before she passed away. I was thinking about her that night, and I went to the piano and played some of the same music I would have played for her. I got done, went into bed, turned the light off. All of a sudden, clock radio on the night table turns itself on. The clock, the illuminated clock, glows like the sun, lights the whole room up, and 3 seconds later shuts itself off. So I go like that, and it does it twice in the next 3 minutes, and then not after that. So as I said, Jane was a complete technophobe, so I don't think she personally got into the digital control systems of that radio. But as the Voice in the Skull experiment said, there are folks whose job it is to make that translation. And I think it's probably done by a variety of means depending on who and what you're dealing with. Again, we don't know. It's important to know that it happens. I'm not sure it's so important to know the mechanics of it. It's interesting, but I think our first job culturally is to make it okay to start talking about all of this, for people to share their experiences. Until it becomes a more natural thing and the taboo is gone, it'll be difficult to make progress in this area. We don't know if our next door neighbor talks to their dead uncle twice a week. I mean, how would we know? Who's going to talk about it? So I think we have to start thinking of these things as normal rather than paranormal. Give them that benefit of the doubt. and make that more culturally acceptable. And it's started. You know, there have been popular TV shows, a lot of books, and so on. And you know, the center of the culture hasn't shifted very much, but it's beginning to. I don't know that we'll see this major shift happen in our lifetimes, but I think a lot of us are here just to start plowing the ground for it and making it okay. So that's kind of how I see it. Right? Yes?
Okay, we're going there.
Okay, I guess I'm just going to put out something different, which is similar along these lines, is that I've had things, like they say a certain type of radio they use, or a certain type of tape recorder they use. Well, I've had it where I've had the phone ring and answer when I only had cell phones in my house, and it was an old phone. Ring, ring, ring. The number you have called is not in service. I'm like,
as if that phone had called out.
yes, and there's no phone. Or I've had it where my TV at 3 o'clock in the morning would just start up, and you'd have to start a VHS, you have to turn the TV on, turn the VHS recorder, start it up at 3 in the morning playing Happy Feet. Or my doorbell ringing in the middle of the night, playing a song that's not on the doorbell. And then my husband saying, that's not even on the doorbell. What's it ringing up? Or 3 in the morning. So many times the doorbell will ding dong, and I'm like, seriously? I don't even understand. So I don't know necessarily it's certain things. And then I kind of wonder, does it have to do with, many of my family members are psychic or have had experiences like this. And then I'm wondering, is it because they're able to utilize other means or still communicate in that way? I don't.
It could be, or it could be that just the fact that you can accept this sort of thing makes it both more possible and more desirable for them to do it.
Okay.
And had you been more resistant or thought it was spooky or something like that, you probably wouldn't have. I can't say that. There's probably less like this.
Yes, I understand. Okay. And Karen, she had a phone call. Can I tell you a phone call?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for putting that movie out to educate us on this. And for me personally, about 20 years ago, my deceased grandmother, who was gone for probably 15 years, had called me in the middle of the night. I didn't know these experiences others had, but she had a strong German accent, and I knew right away who it was. And she was there to tell me that my dad, who just had a stroke, would not die. So, you know, just to see this movie and my own personal experience is very powerful.
Reminding me of an incident that happened some years ago. I was going to media production professionally. I had a young assistant who worked with me for about a month or two. And one day we were sitting in a cafe having lunch, and she was looking a bit distraught or distracted that day. So I said, you know, what's going on with you? And she said, can I tell you a secret? And I said, sure. She said, I got an email from my dead uncle. And I said, oh, that's wonderful. Tell me about it. Right? I said, you know, this happens to people. And you can kind of see her relax, you know. Yeah, she had been an abused child. Her birth family was not a good environment, but she was protected by an uncle of hers who interceded and kind of took her under his wing. And he had worked for Shell Oil Company, and they sent him to Singapore to work. And he passed away there. So a few years later, this young lady is sitting in front of her, or she turns on her computer, and she finds on the desktop a saved email from her dead uncle. And the address, the return address was Singapore@yahoo.com. So she checked, and there was no such address. But the neat thing about this was, and the thing that really freaked her out most, was that she had friends in Colorado and had been there, and also had a boyfriend there, had been there the previous week. Attached to this email was a photograph taken of her and her boyfriend by her Colorado friends, who knew nothing about this uncle. So this photo was attached, was in the email. So, go figure. Yes?
Two questions. I like the schema you had at the end, where it showed all the different ways we're researching.
Yeah.
Has there ever been a conference, or is there a coming together of like a collective of this to kind of, it would seem that there's a synergy as we get more evidence, but as long as there's the discrete, more of a multi-integrated approach is what I'm saying. Does that happen?
I think it's beginning to happen. There are 2 or 3 annual afterlife conferences that are held around the country. Some of them are somewhat parochial and have certain emphasis, but I think this synergy is beginning to happen. When I first started, it was actually before I started presenting to the IANDS group in Marin County, where I live, in the Bay Area. I had attended one of their sessions, and during the Q&A, and it was an NDE was doing a presentation, and I asked a question that involved mediumship. And the person who ran these events turned to me and said, "No, we don't do mediumship here. Oh, not mediumship. This is near-death experience." So that's changed now. But so I don't want to get into a long story there, but you get the idea. Yes.
Question 2 is, I was intrigued by their saying one of the purposes of ITC was to mitigate and address violence. So that really had me thinking, how are they seeing perhaps that would work? I mean,
Yeah.
It's kind of me, from my way of thinking, it's like preaching to the choir. We all believe. We're trying to live in a higher state of consciousness, if you were.
Yeah.
But the world is becoming more violent, or at least as violent as it's always been. And I'm not sure how that would help the average person who's engaging in that much violence. How would that shift their thinking?
Good question. I'm glad you asked that, because it gives me an opportunity to point out that the material in this film was taken from hundreds and hundreds of hours of raw material. So some things have to be put in out of context. The general point being made there is that if ITC brings about a more expanded understanding of who and what we are, that one of the results of that would be a less violent world. So that's basically what it means there. So I agree with you that there's some philosophies that believe there's a sort of a bifurcation going on of souls making their decision as to where they want to go next. And I think there's something good about that, because it's non-judgmental. And even people who we perceive as doing violence and doing stupid things, they are where they are in their evolution. My late partner Jane used to say, it's the job of young souls to create karma. And when she first said that, I kind of resisted that. And then I said, no, wait a minute. They've got to go through the process. They've got to learn. They have to learn about consequences and about where their heart is. And this gets into a whole other area, but by all accounts, this planet has the greatest degree of variety of soul levels, all in the same place. It's very unusual. It's a kind of and it's an extreme experiment, if you want to look at it that way. And I think part of participating in this experiment in a healthy way is to allow people their reality. You may not want to allow people to impinge on yours. So there's a certain rationale to defensive stance in certain situations. But I think this is interesting question is playing out in the political sphere, where you have people on the extreme right and the extreme left behaving they have extremeness in common, right? And so people who are not quite so extreme, even on both sides, are beginning to see that. And I think that's valuable.
It's funny you said that because Echo Bodine said that was here last time. There's such an amassing and a conglomeration, if you will, or an amalgam of so many different. She said in the realms, in the spirit, people are more segregated, and then they come in here. She said the problem is you're all here together.
Yeah. It's said to be the crash course here. Yes. What? Sorry.
So does that mean that you're allowing that there is life also on other planets that aren't quite as dramatic or chaotic?
Every ET contact scenario that I know of in the lore, going back to the 1950s, pretty much asserts that most other human-type development takes place in a more evolutionary and culturally homogeneous environment. And we are a bit of a curiosity to those who visit here. And some of them have been around for quite some time and still don't know what to make of it. Yes?
Are we a curiosity or a zoo?
Both and then some. And who we are also depends on who it is that's observing us. You know, there's a lot of different kinds of consciousness in the cosmos, if you look at it vertically or horizontally. And what a given kind of consciousness makes of us depends on where they're coming from, and vice versa. So I think the next probably 100 to 200 years is going to be very interesting, as things probably will start opening up in terms of our acknowledgement of other levels of consciousness, other, space visitors who I think for the most part don't travel in physical machines through space as we know it. At least they come through the back door or come from other levels and present themselves here as physical, that sort of thing. Again, we don't have the concepts or language to really encompass this, but I think we'll slowly be dragged kicking and screaming into a broader perspective on reality as a whole. So, does that answer your question? Thank you. Yes?
Real quickly, I've always been involved with animals very much. You knew the question had to come, right? Have you any idea of connections directly from animals or animal related? Can you make any comment on? I lost my beloved Tyler on Easter Sunday, very tragically, at church. He's presumed dead. It's been very difficult. But I've worked with animals, worked with animals a good part of my life. I just wondered if you had a comment.
This is a question that comes up a lot, and it comes up in various books and so on. Again, I'm not sure that we have the concepts and language to really nail this one down. But on certain astral environments, we are accompanied by animals. I think it depends on our affinity with animals. If we're very oriented towards them, we will naturally gravitate or levitate to the type of astral environment that encompasses both kinds of vibrations. And those of us who are oriented differently will find ourselves in a different reality bubble. So I think the answer is yes from that perspective. That from what I understand, animals are their own kingdoms to a great extent. Some animals have more of a collective soul. Some animals have a more individualized soul, particularly those who've had extensive contact with humans. it will tend to be more individualized. And my late partner Jane, according to 2 mediums, one in Los Angeles, one in Warsaw, it says that she has a dog with her, and I think I know exactly what dog it is. Daphne the dog. It's a member of her family for many years before she met me. So, yeah, I mean, we're all in this thing together, you know. And we may not all be in the same space or in the same room, as it were, but the universe is a big place. And there's, all kinds of individuation and collectives. I mean, the human-type societies that are highly evolved have apparently have an easygoing collective consciousness about them. And those souls who have a ways to go and are still in duality and big on the light-dark thing, their unity is it remains on a very unconscious level. It's there, but it's suppressed, or it hasn't grown yet into awareness. So presumably all souls have the potential to come into a more enlightened and cooperative life situation. Some take longer than others. Are you familiar with Michael Newton's work?
Yes.
And his work with clients who reported between lives experiences, one of the main takeaways from his work is that everyone's on their own path. Everyone's highly individual, and you can't judge anyone because you don't know why they're here. 2 people with the same types of behavior may be here for completely different reasons. So, there's stuff we know and there's stuff we don't know. And there's stuff I think we have to have some humility about. And one of those is judging people. Yes?
Thanks, I'll accept the last sentence you said. I want to go back to a question for you. All my life I've been able to see the spirit world ever since I was 5 years old. It came to me, I didn't seek it. And this is my reality. I've shied away from it because nobody believes me. I can't prove it to you, but all around us is the spirit world. And the avenue is open if you're open to it. And that is the portal, and that's how they communicate. What I'm really curious is, to pick up on what you say, there's a whole team of people that actually assist in communicating. Because this earth plane is the darkest place you've ever seen.
Tell me about it.
I know, you're on the light, okay? And I want to go back to the light, and I can't get back there. I've tried a couple of times. I've gone to the other side, and they've said to me, nice try, I can't go back to it. Why? You're not welcome here yet, But the whole communication is so fascinating that I wish we would get more mediums involved in opening the avenues of the communication through the medium element of, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but the spirit world is communicating all the time. If you just give them the opportunity to bring that avenue, then there it is. But the next world is intertwined with us all the time. It's right here, right next to you. Your beloved is standing right there. That's the fresh air. How do we get the communications going? Because I've retreated as a medium. I'm isolated. But they also said to me, oh, you haven't had any near-death experiences. I've tried twice to get on the other side.
You seem to be doing very well without.
How do we get together and discuss this and educate people, besides beyond books and being an authority, what to say?
I don't know, other than what I've been doing, and it sounds like you might have your own.
Can I tell you one other experience that happened with a computer the other day? I just used a regular modern computer. And I noticed a light going back and forth on the screen. I thought, oh, that's weird. What is that? And I have this crystal heart that I wear. And oh, that's a reflection of my crystal heart. So I put it back in underneath my chest there. And the light continued. So that's the light something, you know, so I go off and I close all the curtains and I switch off all the lights. And I've got the computer screen and the lights go on. And I know it's there.
Yep.
I'm not sure what my question was.
You did a very important thing in trying to rule out everything else. That was really important and really well done. Question, did this light appear to be being drawn on the computer screen, or did it appear to be reflection?
No.
Could you tell?
It's drawn on the computer screen. I could see it. And I know there's an intelligence behind that light. Because how does it know to go from there to there? But you see, I'm familiar with intelligences on the other side. They're far more intelligent than me. But they're there. So somebody's controlling that light. How they do that, I don't know. But there's something in the mechanism of the computer, isn't there?
There would be any number of ways of programming a computer to do that. And either they are putting the information in the form of digital information so that the computer does what it's supposed to do, or they're somehow directly manifesting it on the screen. Or maybe there's a third or fourth or fifth way that we don't know about.
Right, exactly.
But the important thing is that you determined for yourself that this was not anything ordinary. Right? Do you feel that you are being called to answer your own question in a way, perhaps by being more public or more active?
It's difficult. It's complex. Yeah.
We accept you.
Yeah, but yeah.
We'll listen.
And I understand, because I've spent my life behind the camera and behind the keyboard, and you know, doing these presentations has been a bit of a leap for me. Of course, I'm always in good company when I do this. I'm preaching to the choir, so I feel safe, but safe and encouraged, and I really very much appreciate that. And I think it's important to start with a safe situation, a safe channel, whether it's writing a book or whatever appeals to you. But I don't know enough about your life to know how much actual risk you'd be taking in stepping out, so I can't make a judgment about that. But it sounds like you have a good head start. It sounds like, well, you've experienced involuntary mediumship, right? Have you been an intentional medium all your life?
I don't know if it's intentional, it's just that the spirit world found me. Because the spirit chooses the medium, not the other way around.
Sure, it doesn't happen both ways.
No, I didn't choose it. The face that I saw when I was 5 years old appeared to me at the window. I didn't ask it to come, but I said to him, "Who are you?" And I never received an answer. And then just before I fell asleep, I knew that one day I would find out who that face was. I found out who the face was, and he's a completely different person from me. It's not me, and no, I have no desire to be someone else other than me. Right? I can't cope with me. Why do you want me to be someone else? So it's a different person, so it's not me. So I accepted mediumship, and everybody else said, anyway.
It's okay. It's okay. Thank you very much. So, yes.
Don't go into the audience, please.
Pardon?
Yeah. Don't go in the
Don't?
audience, please. You can just repeat my question, she said.
Okay.
It seems to me like the spirit world has a different way of dealing with energy and matter and time and space. And I've had numerous experiences that I won't go into, but I'll give a very brief example of an object I lost in Chicago in my car that reappeared on a trip to study mediumship in California in my rental car. In the exact same place on the passenger seat, I lost it in Chicago in my car 2 months before, and I went, holy, what? And even if they made it fall out of my purse at that exact moment, which it shouldn't have got through security, it seemed, that plus many other things is like, there's some other way of relating to matter, energy, time, space, and somehow they're connecting us with it. And what do you know about this? What can we read that sort of helps us? Do I have to be a scientist, a physicist? How do we get in some leverage on that?
Did anyone not hear that?
No.
Okay, thank you. My guess, and this is only a guess, is that our beloved, apparently solid physical reality is really a plaything to them. And this phrasing occurred to me when I was visiting Robert Vandenbroek in Holland, because there's a whole lot more going on with him than was in this film. And I think the fact that it doesn't happen more often is only because they recognize the prime directive. If you've watched Star Trek, the prime directive is the understanding that you don't meddle in other people's situations. You don't go in and overwhelm them with energy they don't know what to do with. And I think on those levels, it's simply understood that you don't mess with this, because it could do a lot of damage if it's not done in the right way, at the right moment, the right situation. So, I've always been skeptical of the so-called reality that we've been socialized to believe. And this started very early on when as a child, I had quite a number of precognitive dreams. And I couldn't explain them, but they were enough to show me that stuff was going on backstage. That this was, what we were taught was the whole picture is not the whole picture. And I think we're just simply going to slowly awaken to this. And, there's some philosophies that say that the whole system is going to shift at some point, or it's going to divide into, the one vibration and another vibration. I don't know what scenario is in store, but I know that things cannot stay as they've been. Something's got to give fairly soon, I think. Exactly how that falls out, I don't know. I'm curious to find out. I know that our influence on whatever level will have an effect, collective effect. To what degree, I don't know. I'm curious myself. Yes? Can you stand up?
Yeah, you're also a UFO researcher, correct?
Yeah.
So couple questions, what is your take, how does UFO research overlap with ITC? And then specifically, what is your understanding of crop circles? I know that came up in the movie. What was the question? Well,
the question is, where does UFO research overlap this kind of material, afterlife research and crop circles and so on? I don't think there's any definitive or comprehensive answer to that, except that we have to get outside of our box to understand those relationships. Many so-called ET contacts appear to be contacts with higher dimensional individuals, some of whom can sort of precipitate into our physical reality, can masquerade as little green men in spaceships, project themselves in that way. But these are just these are pigeonholes that we have, and they're the only ones we've got. And we're slowly beginning to stretch them and see where they come together and get a sense of the larger picture. Are you familiar with Whitley Strieber?
Sure.
Right. I think he's one of the more interesting people in this sphere, because he's had this wide range of experiences, including the death of his wife Anne a couple of years ago, who is now very much in his life still, and he's very public about it. So I think he's one of the key people who has already begun to start tying all these things together in his own way. I mean, he's got his own writing style, his own point of view, but he's stuck his neck out. He's been doing it for years. And he's actually a friend of mine. I do a lot of photo analysis for him and Linda Howe and people like that. So I've got one foot down that rabbit hole too, and have for a while. But generally, I just keep asking that question. And I think everyone's got to be asking this question: how do we've got these definitions and these pigeonholes and these categories, and these are basically our projections. And convenient ways for us to try to make sense out of these things. I think a lot of that will shift in a very sort of Copernican way over in the coming years, where we'll realize that, the Earth isn't the center of the universe. When that shift comes from from the material basis to consciousness, a lot of things will fall into place. And I think we won't need some of these intrusive phenomena anymore when that happens. So, yes?
I have a friend who's an NT.
Can you stand, please?
She's had that experience. And one of the questions I asked her, in lieu of what you were talking about a little bit earlier about animals, and I asked, when you were there, did you see any? And the only thing she said, she saw and heard birds. And I've got a cat, or I had a cat, who chose me as his person. And I had nothing to do with it. He just said, "You're mine." And when he died, and I had to have put down, he had breast cancer. I didn't have a choice. And while I was in there with him, the doctor said, "You know what you said in there?" I said, "I have no idea. I didn't know I said anything." He said, "You said put me down too," because I was going very heartbroken. And I hate not to think of not seeing him, not seeing my childhood dog who I grew up with, you know, and Ron too.
Have you had any sense of their presence since then?
A couple of times I felt a cat walking up on the bed, on top of me, kind of, just like the claws. But can you speak to that?
I don't know. I had a cat adopt me once. And it ended up as a kind of a heartbreaking situation for me, because I was then active as a cinematographer and had to go on a round the world trip with a producer, and there was no one to take care of the cat. So I placed him with some friends of mine, and when I got back from the trip, they had divorced. She had moved to Hawaii. He disappeared, and who knows where the cat went. And they lived in a wooded area with other houses nearby, and I assumed that the cat ingratiated himself with a neighbor, but I don't know that for sure. And I always felt badly about that. It was, you know, my excuse is it was unavoidable, but that doesn't make it hurt any less. You know? So anyway, thank you for asking. Oh, yes, sorry, please. Stand.
What's the problem with Ouija boards?
The problem with Ouija boards? Thank you. The problem with Ouija boards seems to be the fact that many people just dabble and don't really do it with intention. Most people who are just play with it unconsciously, many of them get astral garbage coming through. I've actually used a Ouija board for some years with a friend of mine who's quite an accomplished psychic, and we would do a white light meditation before we did the sessions and so on. And the sessions were quite interesting. We never got anything that we thought was garbage or negative or dark or anything like that. Got quite a lot of interesting and enlightening information, and including one particular ET contact, you might say. Because one day I asked a question, and the guides that we normally communicated with said, "Well, we don't know the answer. We'll have to call someone who knows." So a few moments later, this huge energy comes into the room, and the planchette really starts moving around. And this character introduces himself by name. After some back and forth, we learned that he was, and I say he, it was a very masculine energy, was part of a group of folks from another galaxy. It was so distant they could not come here in their physical bodies. They came here in their astral bodies, and they created what they called a working environment. We can think of it as a spaceship, but it's not nuts and bolts. It's a collective, projected working environment. And they said they'd been around here for about 250 years, that they found our civilization extremely intriguing and puzzling. And we asked them, well, where are you right now? And they said, well, we're high over Rio de Janeiro and here in the room with you. And on another occasion we asked them where they were, and said, we're over Cuba watching a baseball game. And went on to say that they found our spectator sports to be quite unusual and puzzling to them. I don't think they were very much into competition and that sort of thing. But another really interesting thing happened. This is back in the 1970s. And one day Sam and I are doing the board and talking to the guides. And all of a sudden one of these guys comes in and says, excuse us for interrupting, but tomorrow's a very important day. And Sam and I look at each other, what's tomorrow? Oh my God, it's Nixon's second inauguration. And there was a huge fear of violence in Washington on that day because there were protests planned and the National Guard was going to be called out and all that. So this character is saying, yes, Nixon is a very fearful person and there's a great risk of serious trouble. And they said, we know how difficult this would be for you, but we invite you to join us in sending him love. And Sam and I looked at each other and said, yes, it's difficult, we'll do what we can. And as it happened, there was zero violence in Washington that next day. And whether it had anything to do with this, I can't tell you. But this is some of the kinds of things. And the Ouija board's an interesting tool because it's a psychological crutch, basically. And it's an effective one because it's physical. But it can be used to good effect if your intention is, is on the beam and you're skeptical and ask the right questions and don't take anything as gospel. So it's a long answer to your question, but I hope it answered it. Yes?
Thank
you. Yes?
May I ask you one more question? You referred to the benign influences that we've discussed, and the psychologists also say you have to look out for some of the negative influences that bring grief, anxiety, sadness, almost inescapable forces for some poor souls. Have you learned about ways to use psychic methods to release that, relieve people from the negativity that sometimes comes to channel through?
I haven't had any personal experience with that, so I guess the answer is no. I know some people do more specialize in that sort of healing work. I haven't done it, but thank you for the question.
Thank you so much, Dan, for coming and showing us your wonderful films and telling us all about these things. It's been a great experience and something that's going to provide lots of thought-provoking images, I'm sure, for the months to come. And we'll all meet here next month and see Conchetta Bertoldi. And don't forget to grab your workshop flyer and your postcard on the way out the door. And thank you for coming. We are going to Ruby's if you're curious. And see you next month.